Alright, settle in folks, grab a blanket, dim the lights, maybe crank up a fan for that soft soothing hum. Tonight we're diving headfirst into the frosty, unforgiving world of Homo neanderthalensis, the Ice Age's toughest cousins who didn't just survive, they owned it. These weren't your cartoon cavemen grunting and tripping over their own clubs. No, Neanderthals were the real deal, built like tanks sharp as flint, and with a knack for turning a frozen wasteland into home sweet home. Before we get rolling, hit that like button. If you're into epic survival tales, subscribe if you want more, and drop a comment telling me where you're tuning in from. New York at midnight, Tokyo at dawn. I'm curious. Now picture this, it's 80,000 years ago, and Europe's a giant freezer. The air stings your lungs, snow crunches underfoot, and somewhere in the distance, a woolly mammoth's trumpeting like it's auditioning for a disaster flick. You'd last about 10 minutes before turning into a human popsicle, but the Neanderthals, they're out there thriving, probably chuckling at the cold. These guys weren't just another species, they were the ultimate underdogs engineered by nature to shrug off blizzards and wrestle dinner to the ground. Their story's one of grit brains and a surprising dash of style, like they were the first to say, sure it's an ice age, but I'm still going to rock this eagle talon necklace. Let's set the scene you're trudging through a pine-dotted valley, the wind howling like a pack of wolves. Up ahead there's a flicker of firelight from a cave mouth, the smell of roasting meat cutting through the crisp air. That's where we're headed, into the world of a people who didn't just endure the Ice Age but made it their playground. Stick with me, and you'll see why Neanderthals weren't just survivors, they were legends. Now that you're cozy by that imaginary cave fire, let's talk about what made Neanderthals the Ice Age's heavyweight champs. If you bumped into one on a snowy trail, you'd freeze not just from the cold, but from sheer awe at their build. These folks weren't tall, averaging about 5'4" to 5'6", but calling them short is like calling a bear cuddly. They were compact, stocky, like someone took a modern human and squashed them into a powerhouse. Broad shoulders, barrel chests, and muscles that could make a mammoth think twice. Their rib cages massive, like they were smuggling small boulders under their skin built to house lungs that gulped down frigid air and turned it into raw energy. Their bones were thick, dense, the kind you'd expect in a medieval siege engine, not a person. Imagine limbs so sturdy they could haul half a reindeer without breaking a sweat hands, big enough to crush flint into tools, or let's be honest, open the toughest pickle jar in prehistory. And that face, oh, it was a masterpiece of survival. Huge forward-jutting noses warmed icy air before it hit their lungs like nature's built-in heater. Brow ridges so prominent they could have doubled as sun visors, shielding eyes that scanned for predators in the gloom. No chins to speak of, but jaws strong enough to chew through frozen hide without a complaint. This wasn't a body thrown together by chance. It was a custom job, sculpted by millennia of frost and hardship. Every inch screamed I was born for this, whether it was sprinting across tundra or squatting by a fire-napping stone into blades. Neanderthals didn't just look tough. They were tough, the kind of tough that makes you wonder if they ever even noticed the cold. You're still huddled by that cave fire, the scent of pine and charred bone in the air, and you can't help but marvel at the Neanderthals' sheer toughness. Their skeletons weren't just bones, they were fortresses built to take a beating and keep going. Picture this femurs so thick and robust they make your average human leg bones look like brittle twigs. These weren't designed for jogging to catch a bus, but for powering through jagged mountains, maybe with a deer carcass slung over one shoulder. Their knees, built for constant squatting and bending, were perfect for crouching over a fire-shaping flint or gutting a kill. Neanderthals' arms were just as brutal upper arm bones, like steel beams forearms, thicker than most folks' thighs, made for swinging heavy tools or dragging prey across rocky tundra. Their rib cages flared wide, housing lungs that could suck in enough icy air to fuel a day of hunting in a blizzard. These bones weren't just sturdy, they were over-engineered like medieval cathedrals crafted to stand for centuries, and the wear on them, it tells a story of relentless grit. Fractured ribs healed, breaks, joints, ground down from years of hauling, climbing and surviving. Yet they kept moving, kept hunting, kept living. It's as if their skeletons were saying, Ice Age. What Ice Age? Hand me that mammoth tusk, I've got work to do. If you've ever winced lifting a heavy grocery bag, just know a Neanderthal would have carried it plus the cart and probably tossed in a boulder for fun. Their bones weren't just a frame, they were a testament to a life that laughed in the face of hardship. Now let's talk about what was going on inside those thick skulls, because Neanderthals weren't just brawn, they had brains to match. Imagine a cranial engine bigger than yours, clocking in at 500 to a 750 cubic centimetres, compared to our measly 350. That's right, these cavemen were lugging around high-performance minds, and they didn't waste them on trivial stuff like doom-scrolling. A big chunk of that brain power went to sensory processing eyes sharp enough to spot an elk through a snowstorm, reflexes quick enough to dodge a cave bear's swipe. Their visual cortex was a beast likely giving them hawk-like vision to navigate cliffs and track game in the dim Ice Age light. But don't think they were just wired for survival instincts. These folks planned hunts coordinated with their crew and crafted tools with the precision of a master sculptor. Evidence of cave art and ochre use, think prehistoric makeup or war paint, hints. They had a creative streak, maybe even a sense of swagger. Their brains weren't just about reacting. They were about imagining, problem-solving, and maybe even dreaming under a starlit sky. Sure, their prefrontal cortex, the let's not do anything stupid part, might have been a bit smaller than ours, but they weren't reckless. They thrived for 300,000 years outsmarting predators and weather that would have sent us crying for a heated blanket. If you've ever felt proud of solving a tricky puzzle picture, a Neanderthal carving a spear point, squinting into a blizzard and thinking, yeah, I've got this. Their minds were as much a weapon as their muscles, and they wielded both like champions. You're still crouched by that flickering cave fire, the Ice Age wind howling outside like it's got a personal grudge. Let's talk about how Neanderthals didn't just survive this frozen hellscape. They were built for it, like nature's custom-order snowplows. Their bodies were compact, stocky, not by some cosmic accident, but by design crafted to trap heat in a world where the cold could snap your bones. Short, thick limbs meant less surface area for heat to escape, unlike those lanky frames that had shivered themselves to death. Picture their massive noses not just for show, but like built-in radiators warming frigid air before it hit their lungs. It's as if evolution said, you want to breathe in a blizzard. Here's a schnoz that could double as a furnace. Their skin, likely pale to soak up every scrap of weak sunlight for vitamin D, was a survival hack for the endless grey of Ice Age winters. Those enormous lungs tucked in wide, flaring rib cages powered a body that never stopped climbing, hunting, hauling all, while the wind screamed and the snow piled high. Every feature was a middle finger to the cold. Their low, sturdy frames moved through drifts like tanks. Their broad hands gripped tools through frostbite weather, and their whole setup said, winter, I eat winter for breakfast. If you've ever bundled up in 3 jackets just to grab the mail, imagine a Neanderthal striding out in stitched hides, grinning into the gale, perfectly at home, in a world that would make you beg for a space heater. Now let's ditch the Hollywood image of Neanderthals in ragged loincloths looking like they rolled out of a cave with zero fashion sense. These folks were the Ice Age's tailors, stitching together outfits that kept them warm and maybe even a little stylish. Picture them scraping animal hides, deer, mammoth, whatever they could wrestle down until they were soft enough to wrap around their sturdy frames. Using bone needles, they sewed these hides into fitted garments, not just flung over a shoulder like a bad toga, but crafted with care, tight enough to block the biting wind. No buttons, no zippers, just pure ingenuity and a lot of patience. And accessories. Oh, they had those too. Eagle talons, pierced shells and beads found at Neanderthal sites weren't just random trinkets. They were flair, maybe even status symbols. Imagine a Neanderthal strutting into camp, a talon necklace swinging, thinking, yeah, I took down that bird and I look good doing it. They even smeared ochre, that red, earthy pigment, on their tools' bodies, maybe even their faces like the original war paint or a prehistoric glow-up. This wasn't just about staying warm, it was about identity, maybe a touch of swagger, in a world where survival was the ultimate flex. If you've ever spent 10 minutes picking the perfect scarf picture, a Neanderthal threading a bone needle by firelight crafting gear that said, I'm not just surviving this Ice Age, I'm owning it with style. Their wardrobe was local, sustainable and tough as hell long before anyone dreamed of a runway. You're still by that crackling cave fire, the Ice Age chill gnawing at the edges of your imagination. Now let's talk about Neanderthal strength. The kind that makes you wonder if they were secretly forged in some cosmic gym. These folks weren't just strong, they were punch a woolly rhino and walk away whistling strong. Their shoulders broad as barn doors rippled with muscle that could hurl a spear through hide tougher than leather. Arms like tree trunks with forearms so thick they could have crushed stone just for fun were built for close-up carnage. Think stabbing a thrashing elk at point-blank range while it tried to ruin your day. Their legs short but stacked, powered them up rocky slopes with half a carcass slung over their back, no complaints. Fossil evidence shows muscle attachment sites so pronounced it's like their bones were screaming. We lift a Neanderthal male could have been 50% stronger than your average modern human, maybe double in upper body power. They didn't hunt from a safe distance with fancy bows. They charged in spears gripped tight, dodging tusks and hooves like it was just another Tuesday. Their grip strength, absurd. Thumbs, bigger fingers, broader knuckles like small hammers, shaking hands, with one might have left you needing a splint. If you've ever struggled to open a stubborn jar, picture a Neanderthal casually twisting off a mammoth's tusk for a tool. This wasn't Jimbro flexing. It was survival, raw and relentless, the kind of power that made the Ice Age sit down and take notes. The fire's glow dances on the cave walls, and you're starting to get why Neanderthals were legends, but their strength came with scars, lots of them. Their fossils read like a prehistoric ER log, cracked ribs, shattered arms, skulls, dented like they'd gone 10 rounds with a cave bear and called it a warm-up. Paleoanthropologists say their injury patterns match modern rodeo riders, folks who tangle with one-ton beasts for a living. Take Shanidar 1, a Neanderthal who took a skull-crushing blow, went half-blind, had a withered arm and a busted foot, yet kept on living for years. How because his crew had his back feeding him, protecting him, proving these brutes had hearts as tough as their bones. Another guy, La Chapelle au Sein, was an old-timer with arthritis so bad his spine was a wreck, yet he was cared for too. These weren't solo survivors. They were a team patching each other up with moss and grit, then heading back out to face the next mammoth. Their lives were a masterclass in resilience. Break. A bone, shrug it off, keep hunting. Trip over a root today and you're icing your ankle for a week. Neanderthals got trampled by megafauna, dusted themselves off, and went back for seconds. It wasn't just physical toughness, it was a stubborn, bone-deep refusal to quit. They lived hard, loved hard, and when the Ice Age threw its worst at them, they just grinned, wrapped their wounds, and said, "Is that all you got? You're still nestled by that cave fire, its warmth, a faint echo of the blazes Neanderthals mastered to tame the Ice Age." These folks didn't just stumble onto fire, they wielded it like a weapon, a tool, and a lifeline. Picture a windswept valley, snow piling up like nature's trying to bury you alive. Neanderthals, they're calmly striking flint against pyrite sparks, catching on dry moss, coaxing a flame to life with the focus of a chef perfecting a recipe. No matches, no lighters, just raw skill and a pile of rocks that said, "Hold my frozen venison." Archaeological sites show hearths, centralised fire pits with charred bones and ash layers stacked over years. Proof they weren't just sparking random campfires, but building homes around them. Fire wasn't just for warmth. It was a game changer. They roasted meat, making it easier to chew and unlocking nutrients that fueled their massive bodies. It scared off prowling cave lions, casting shadows that turned a dark, growling night into a safe haven. They even heated flint to shape sharper tools, dipping their toes into prehistoric engineering. Imagine them gathered around the flames, the smell of sizzling fat mingling with pine, maybe swapping stories or just staring into the glow, knowing they'd told winter to shove it. If you've ever struggled to light a barbecue in the rain, picture a Neanderthal building a fire in a blizzard, then casually roasting dinner while the wind howled in defeat. Fire wasn't just survival, it was their way of saying, "This Ice Age, we run it." The cave's firelight flickers, glinting off a chunk of flint in a Neanderthal's hand, and you're about to see why these folks were the Ice Age's master craftsmen. Forget the idea of them bashing rocks together like clueless toddlers. Neanderthals were stone-cold innovators, turning raw stone into tools with the precision of a sculptor. Their go-to trick was the Levallois method, a fancy name for a process that's basically prehistoric brain surgery. They'd carefully shape a stone core, planning each strike to chip off flakes in perfect shapes. Think of it like prepping a meal with every cut measured for efficiency. These flakes became scrapers, points and blades sharp enough to skin a deer or carve wood. Some tools were even hafted, glued to wooden shafts with tree resin and sinew, creating spears that were less stick with pointy end, and more Ice Age Swiss Army knife. Their toolkits varied by region: limestone here, flint there, even bone and antler in some spots showing. They weren't just copying a manual, but adapting to whatever the land threw at them. Over time their tools got sharper, sleeker, deadlier, proof of brains that never stopped tinkering. Picture a Neanderthal squatting by a river, the clink of stone on stone mixing with the rush of water, crafting a blade that'd last a lifetime. If you've ever fumbled with a flat-pack furniture kit, imagine a Neanderthal building a shelter butchering dinner, and maybe even settling a score, all with tools they made by hand. Their craft wasn't just survival, it was art. You're still by that cave fire, its glow painting the walls with shadows, and it's time to rethink what you know about Neanderthals. These weren't just muscle-bound hunters, They had soul, a spark of something deeper that flickered in their art and rituals. Forget the grunt and club stereotype. Picture them carefully digging shallow graves, laying their dead to rest with traces of pollen, maybe flowers tucked beside them. Was it grief? Respect? A hope for something beyond the frost? We can't know, but it's clear they cared. Mourned, didn't just shrug and move on. Then there's their art cave walls in Spain smeared with red ochre over 64,000 years ago, before modern humans even crashed the European party. Those handprints and lines weren't doodles, they were statements, maybe stories told in pigment. They collected shells, eagle talons, feathers piercing them for necklaces or ornaments, not for survival but for meaning. Maybe a status flex, maybe a ritual, maybe just because it looked cool. Deep in a French cave, they built rings of broken stalagmites 176,000 years ago, in pitch-black silence, like they were crafting a monument to mystery and language. Their hyoid bone and genes hint they could talk, maybe not reciting poetry, but sharing something real, plans, jokes, or a quiet word about the hunt. Imagine a Neanderthal by firelight ochre on their cheeks, a talon necklace glinting, telling a story that made the others lean in. If you've ever doodled in a notebook or worn a favourite ring, picture them crafting beauty in a world of ice and claws, proving they weren't just surviving, they were living. The cave fires dying down, embers glowing like the last whispers of the Neanderthal story. And now we get to the part that's literally in your blood. Around 60,000 years ago, when early modern humans wandered into Europe, they met the locals Neanderthals, and let's just say things got cosy. Not awkward family reunion cosy, but you up in a cave cosy. DNA proves it. Most folks of non-African descent carry 1 to 4% Neanderthal genes, meaning your great times 1,000 grandparent had an Ice Age fling that stuck. These weren't one-off hookups. Genetic evidence shows multiple meet-cutes across millennia, with Neanderthal guys and human gals mixing more often, maybe charmed by a well-timed fire-starting trick. This wasn't just romance or survival, it left traces in your immune system, skin tone, maybe even your hatred of cilantro. But it's a bittersweet legacy. By 40,000 years ago, Neanderthals faded out, maybe outcompeted by humans' faster breeding and fancier weapons, or swallowed by climate shifts that turned their icy turf into a soggy mess. No epic battles, no apocalypse, just a quiet fade, their last holdouts in Gibraltar's caves. Yet they're not gone. Their DNA hums in us, their tools and art whisper in the dirt. Their resilience echoes in every stubborn human who pushes through. If you've ever felt a weird pride in toughing out a cold day, thank your Neanderthal roots. They didn't vanish, they became part of us, their story etched in bones, blood and the firelit caves we still dream about. Picture yourself in the dust and clangor of 12th century Japan, where the Genpei War rages like a storm tearing the land apart. Amid the chaos of armoured samurai clashing, one figure stands out, not because she's out of place, but because she's fiercer than most. Meet Tomo Gozen, a female warrior who didn't just fight in a man's world, she redefined it. Forget the dainty court ladies of your history books. Tomo was a whirlwind with a katana, her bow singing death from horseback, her presence a slap to every rule that said women couldn't wield steel. She wasn't just a samurai, she was a legend forged in blood and loyalty, serving Minamoto no Yoshinaka, a general with dreams as big as his battles. The chronicles call her beautiful pale skin, long hair, a face that could hush a room, but don't let that fool you. Her beauty was the least of her weapons. She could slice through enemy ranks, take heads mid-gallop, and ride on without breaking a sweat, all while men twice her size gaped or bled out. This is no fairy tale. It's a tale of grit of a woman who carved her name into a world that tried to erase her. So dim, the lights maybe crack a window for that cool night breeze and settle in. We're diving into the heart of feudal Japan, where Tomo Gozen wasn't just a warrior, she was a storm that changed history. Drop a comment below, where are you listening from and what time's it there? Let's ride into this saga together. You're standing in the shadow of a samurai training yard, the air thick with sweat and the sharp clink of steel. This is where Tomo Gozen's story takes root in a world that told women to stay quiet, but where she learned to roar. Born into a minor samurai family in Echigo during the late Heian period, Tomoe wasn't raised to embroider or pour tea, she was moulded for war. Maybe she grew up in the household of Minamoto no Yoshinaka, her lord, and maybe more, but one thing's clear, her childhood wasn't soft. While boys drilled with wooden swords, Tomo had to fight twice as hard to prove she belonged. Her every move watched, judged, and whispered about. Her training was brutal hours swinging a katana, until her hands blistered mastering the naginata's deadly curve, learning to loose arrows from a galloping horse without missing a beat. She didn't just learn to fight, she learned to read her enemy's flinch to time her strike like a hawk diving for prey. Armour weighed heavy, but she wore it like a second skin, moving with a grace that hid its lethal edge. Society said women belonged behind screens, but Tomo forced her way to the front blade in hand, proving her worth in sweat and silence. Every skill was a defiance, every scar a badge, because failure wasn't just a loss, it'd be proof she shouldn't be there. Picture her, a young woman in a man's arena, her breath fogging in the dawn, knowing every cut had to be perfect. If you've ever pushed past doubt to prove yourself, Tomo's early years were at times 1,000, forging a warrior who'd soon make history bleed. You're deep in the heart of feudal Japan now, the Genpei War's chaos swirling around you like a monsoon. It's 1180, and the Minamoto and Taira clans are tearing the country apart, fighting for the imperial throne. In this storm of steel and betrayal, Tomo Gozen rises like a blade catching firelight. She's no mere follower at Minamoto. No Yoshinaka's side, she's his commander, his shadow, his edge. Yoshinaka, a brash general with dreams of ruling Kyoto, isn't content to play second fiddle to his cousin Minamoto no Yoritomo. He raises an army in the rugged northern provinces, and Tomoe's right there, her katana gleaming, her bow taut leading troops, with a glare that could stop a charge. She's not some token warrior for courtly show. She's calling shots, slicing through enemies, and proving loyalty isn't just a word, it's blood on the snow. The war's a brutal affair, arrows hiss like vipers' swords clash in forests thick with mist, and rivers run red. Tomo's no stranger to the carnage. She rides at the front, her armour clanking, her voice cutting through the din to rally men who'd follow her into hell. She's Yoshinaka's audacity made flesh, a woman who spits on tradition and dares the world to challenge her. Picture her on horseback, the wind whipping her hair, leading a charge that shatters Taira lines, her every move a defiance of what a woman should be. If you've ever stood your ground when the odds were stacked against you, Tomo's rise in the Genpei War was that amplified by the clash of empires and the weight of history. The battlefield's a blur of dust and blood, and Tomo Gozen's in the thick of it, a storm carved into human form. The Genpei War's at its peak, and she's not just fighting, she's rewriting what victory looks like. Take the Battle of Yokotagawara, where she led a charge that smashed through Taira ranks like a boulder through glass. Chronicles say she took samurai heads, mind you not some easy pickings, and presented them as trophies, each one a bloody receipt of her skill. This wasn't about glory. It was proof, a way to silence the whispers that a woman couldn't belong here. Her katana flashed mid-gallop, her arrows found throats, before enemies could blink, and her warhorse moved like it knew her thoughts. She didn't just fight men twice her size, she humiliated them, leaving them sprawled in the dirt, their pride as broken as their bones. Tomo's valour wasn't just in kills, it was in defying a world that boxed women into silence. She commanded respect not with words, but with steel, carrying heads back to camp like any warrior, proving her place wasn't granted, it was earned. Imagine her blood-streaked armour dented, riding through the aftermath, her gaze daring anyone to question her. If you've ever pushed through a moment where you had to prove your worth, picture Tomo. Her hands steady her heart, a furnace turning every battle into a statement. She wasn't just a samurai, she was the standard they all chased. You're knee-deep in the Genpei War's turmoil, the air heavy with ambition and betrayal. Minamoto no Yoshinaka, Tomoe Gozen's lord, isn't just fighting the Taira. He's dreaming bigger, aiming to seize Kyoto, and the Minamoto clan's reigns from his cousin Yoritomo. By 1183, his northern army's tearing through enemies, and Tomoe's at his side not as a shadow, but as a blade, her presence a warning to anyone who underestimates him. She's no mere enforcer. She's his equal in strategy, her katana carving his path to power. Yoshinaka's victories pile up like fallen leaves, his audacity shaking the imperial court. But ambition's a hungry beast, and his grows too fast. He storms Kyoto, driving out the Taira, and for a moment he's Japan's most powerful man, the city's pulse in his grip. Tomo, blood-stained and unyielding, stands with him, her loyalty a steel thread in the chaos. Yet cracks form. Yoshinaka plunders Kyoto's riches, alienates nobles, and makes a play for the emperor himself, a move that paints a target on his back. Yoritomo, watching from afar, smells weakness, his own ambition sharpening. Tomoe senses the shift, her sharp eyes catching whispers of betrayal, but her place is at Yoshinaka's side, her sword ready. Picture her in Kyoto's smoky streets, armour glinting under torchlight, knowing every step forward risks a fall. If you've ever chased a dream only to feel the ground shift beneath you, Tomoe lived that her heart bound to a man whose ambition was both her strength and her doom. The air in Kyoto's choked with smoke and fear, the Yenpei War turning inward like a blade twisting in a wound. It's late 1183 and Yoshinaka's triumph has curdled. His bold moves, looting the city, defying nobles, trying to control Emperor Go-Shirakawa, have made him enemies faster than he made victories. Minamoto no Yoritomo, now the clan's true power, brands him a traitor, sending generals Yoshitsune and Noriori to crush him. Tomoe Gozen, ever loyal, stands firm as the world crumbles around her lord. Kyoto's no longer a prize, it's a trap. Yoshinaka flees with a handful of retainers, Tomoe among them, her katana still sharp. Her gaze unyielding. They're hunted now, not hunters. The once mighty northern army are reduced to ghosts in the snow. She rides beside him, her breath fogging in the frigid air, knowing every hoofbeat could be their last. The Minamoto civil war's begun, and Tomoe's fighting not for glory but for survival, her loyalty to Yoshinaka, a fire that won't gut her out. The chronicles don't linger on her thoughts, but imagine her armour-dented hair whipping in the wind, scanning the horizon for enemies, her heart a mix of fury and resolve. Betrayal stings worse than any blade, yet she doesn't waver. If you've ever stood by someone when everything's falling apart, picture Tomoe, her sword a lifeline riding into the dark with a man whose dreams have turned to ash, ready to face whatever comes next. The snow falls heavy on the plains of Owazu. February 1184, and the air's thick with the promise of blood. Minamoto no Yoshinaka, once Kyoto's conqueror, now stands with a ragged band of loyalists, his dreams crushed under the hooves of betrayal. Tomoe Gozen, his fiercest warrior, grips her katana, her breath a white plume in the freezing dawn. The enemy 100 strong, led by Yoshitsune and Noriori, closes in their armour, glinting like cold steel stars. It's a hopeless stand, but Tomoe doesn't flinch. The Heike Monogatari paints her as a demon unleashed. She charges into the fray, seeking Hatayama Shigetada, a warrior of renown. No hesitation, no fear, just a blur of steel, as she locks blades, unseats him, and takes his head in one brutal fluid strike. It's not showmanship, it's samurai soul, a final roar against oblivion. Blood stains the snow, her horse snorts, and she rides back through the carnage defiant. Yoshinaka's end looms, his horse bogs in a rice paddy, arrows find him, and his loyal retainer falls in a dramatic suicide. Legend says he urged Tomoe to flee, fearing shame if she died beside him. Imagine her helmet-tight eyes burning, torn between loyalty and survival, her sword still singing. If you've ever faced a moment where you had to stand or break, picture Tomoe at Owazu, her charge a blaze of glory, etching her name into eternity as the battle's last defiant cry. The snow settles over Owazu's battlefield, the clash of steel fading into eerie silence, and Tomoe Gozen vanishes like a ghost into the storm. No chronicle pins down her fate, and maybe that's her final rebellion, slipping history's grasp to become myth. The Heike Monogatari spins conflicting tales. One says Yoshinaka ordered her to flee, sparing his honour from a woman's death at his side. Did she obey, riding off with a heart heavy as her armour? Another whispers she fought on, cutting through enemies until she vanished into the mountains, a ronin unbound. Some claim she was captured, forced to marry an enemy general, Wada Yoshimori, bearing a child before retreating to a nun's quiet life. Others insist she shed her warrior's hair, took a new name, and melted into Nagano's monasteries, her sword buried with her past. No grave, no record, just stories, each one a spark in the dark. Picture her blood-streaked standing at a crossroads, the wind howling her name, choosing a path no one could follow. Her disappearance isn't a fade-out. It's a transformation, freeing her from the samurai code that bound her. If you've ever walked away from a fight to find your own way, imagine Tomoe, her katana sheathed, stepping into silence, her legacy, already burning brighter than any battlefield. She didn't just vanish, she became immortal, a shadow that still dances in Japan's soul. The battlefield of Owazu fades into memory, and Tomoe Gozen's shadow grows larger, no longer bound by blood or steel. After her vanishing act, Japan's storytellers, poets, monks and playwrights take her spark and fan it into a blaze. By the 13th century, the Heike Monogatari, a war epic chanted by blind Biwa Hoshi, to the wail of lutes carves her into legend. She's not just a warrior now, she's a tragic heroine, her blade a symbol of loyalty, her beauty a tear-soaked tragedy. In No and Kabuki theatres, Tomoe strides across stages, her armour traded for flowing robes, her battles stylized into dances that make audiences weep. They paint her as a lover, a demon, a ghost, each version softening her edges to fit the era's tastes, yet her fire never dims. Mothers whisper her name to daughters, soldiers murmur it by campfires, her defiance, a quiet rebellion against a world that cages women. By the Edo period, artists splash her onto scrolls, a lone figure on horseback blade, poised face, calm as a storm's eye. Samurai manuals list her among martial paragons, her name a mantra for sword schools. She's no longer just a woman, she's a myth slipping through history's cracks to haunt Japan's soul. Imagine her story retold under lantern light, each telling adding a layer like lacquer on a blade. If you've ever felt a tale reshape, you picture Tomoe, her truth blurred, but her spirit sharp, forever cutting through time. Tomoe Gozen's blade may have stilled centuries ago, but her echo thunders through Japan and beyond a roar that time can't silence. From the Kamakura period's rigid patriarchy to today's neon-lit cities, she's a symbol of defiance. A woman who didn't just break rules, she forged her own. In modern Japan, she's named alongside samurai giants like Musashi, but her weight is unique, a female warrior who didn't just fight, but challenged what should be. Manga artists draw her charging through blood-soaked fields. Video games cast her as a steel-willed heroine, feminist scholars lift her as proof that women's strength isn't new, it's ancient. Schools bear her name, martial arts dojos invoke her spirit, and cosplayers at anime conventions don her armour, naginata in hand. She's on stamps, posters, even anime plotlines her story, a rallying cry for anyone told they don't belong. Statues of her stand in Nagano gazing over mountains she might have roamed while schoolgirls study her in history class, her defiance a spark in their eyes. Yet her power lies in her mystery. No memoirs, no confirmed grave, just a void filled by countless voices. Was she a general? A ronin? A nun? It doesn't matter. She's every woman who's stood tall against the odds. If you've ever drawn strength from a hero who felt larger than life, picture Tomoe, her legacy, a fire that lights every fight for identity, justice, and place, burning eternal in a world she reshaped with every swing of her sword. Settle in, maybe crack a window for that soft night breeze, and let's sail into a world where the sea was both a mystery and a map. Long before compasses or GPS, ancient mariners stared at endless horizons and asked, "What's out there?" These weren't reckless daredevils, they were dreamers with salt in their veins. Engineers who read stars like books, navigators who turned waves into roads. Picture a twilight sky, no satellites, just a canvas of constellations, guiding you across an ocean that could swallow you whole. As early as 40,000 years ago, humans were crafting rafts to cross hundreds of miles to places like Australia, not by luck, but with a sharp eye for tides and winds. By 3000, BCE cultures from Mesopotamia to the Nile were rigging sails, their boats stitching together the first threads of global trade. These seafarers faced storms, starvation and shores they'd never see again yet. They went driven by hunger, curiosity or sheer stubbornness. They learned to track birds flocking toward land, to feel currents shift under their hulls, to chant star paths passed down through generations. This wasn't just survival, it was humanity's first leap toward connection, tying distant lands with ropes of courage and sail. If you've ever felt the pull of the unknown, imagine those first sailors, their hands, calloused eyes fixed on the horizon, chasing a world they couldn't yet name. Drop a comment. Where are you listening from tonight? Let's set sail together. You're gliding across the Aegean, now the sea, a sapphire mirror under a blazing sun, and we're docking with the Minoans, the ancient world's maritime maestros. From 2000 to 1450, BCE Crete's islanders didn't just live by the sea, they ruled it, turning waves into highways of trade and culture. Their heart was Knossos, a palace bursting with frescoes of dolphins and ships, not mere art, but a love letter to the ocean. Minoan vessels sleek with square sails and rows of oars danced across the Mediterranean carrying olive oil, wine and pottery to Egypt, the Levant and beyond. These weren't warships, but floating bazaars swapping goods and ideas with every port. Picture their sailors bronzed and squinting, navigating by starlight and coastal cliffs, reading the water's hue for hidden shoals. They knew the Aegean's moods when winds sang soft or screamed fury, making voyages others wouldn't dare. Their trade wasn't just profit. It was a web of influence spreading Minoan art, religion, and even whispers of their script which helped birth the Greek alphabet. But the sea giveth, and taketh around 1450 BCE, a volcanic eruption on Thera likely unleashed tsunamis that smashed their ports, shaking their empire. Imagine a Minoan captain sails taut, watching ash cloud the sky, his world unravelling. If you've ever built something only to see it tested by fate, picture the Minoans, their legacy enduring in every sail that followed, proof the sea was theirs before it was anyone's. You're sailing the Mediterranean now, the salt spray sharp on your skin, and we're trailing the Phoenicians, the sea's slickest entrepreneurs. From 1500 to 300 BCE, these city-state hustlers, tyre-side on Byblos, didn't conquer with swords, but with sails turning the sea into a bustling trade network. Their ships, sleek as sharks, darted with square sails and oars hugging coasts or braving open water to link Egypt with Greece, Mesopotamia with North Africa. They hauled glass cedar wood and that famous purple dye worth more than gold, but their real cargo was ideas. Picture a Phoenician captain, eyes creased from squinting at Polaris the North Star, guiding his crew through nights black as pitch. They read wind patterns like poets knew every cove's secret, and pioneered celestial navigation before it had a name. Their outposts like Carthage sprouted across coasts, each a node in a web of commerce that made the Mediterranean hum. But their slickest trick? The alphabet 22 simple characters that spread like wildfire, inspiring Greek Latin, and more making trade entails easier to track. Imagine a Phoenician merchant docking at a foreign port, his hold stuffed with treasures, his script changing how the world talks. If you've ever hustled to connect people or ideas, picture these sailors, their ships not just vessels but bridges weaving cultures into a tapestry that still holds. They didn't claim the sea, they made it everyone's. Now you're adrift in the vast Pacific, the horizon, an endless curve, and we're with the Austronesians, the boldest mariners who ever lived. Starting around 3000 BCE from Taiwan, they didn't just sail, they colonised half the planet, from Madagascar to Easter Island, with no metal tools or maps, just guts and genius. Their outrigger canoes, stable as floating islands, and double-hulled voyagers carried families, pigs and taro, across thousands of miles. Picture a Polynesian wayfinder, eyes locked on the stars, over 200 of them each a point on their mental map, steering by the sun's arc and moon's glow. They read the ocean like a living scroll, swells bending round distant islands, seabirds arrowing toward land, even the taste of salt water shifting near shore. This wasn't guesswork. It was science chanted through generations, etched in memory. By 1500 BCE, they'd hit the Philippines and Indonesia. By 1000 CE, they'd stitched the Pacific with settlements, their lapita pottery, marking their trail like breadcrumbs. They didn't just explore, they built civilizations, spreading languages and crops wherever they landed. Imagine a wayfinder, salt-crusted, guiding his canoe under a starlit sky, knowing one wrong turn could doom them all. If you've ever navigated by instinct through uncharted waters, picture these voyagers, their sails catching trade winds, turning the world's biggest ocean into a highway of human dreams. You're drifting along the Red Sea's shimmering coast now, the sun scorching the deck, and we're with the ancient Egyptians, not just pyramid builders, but sailors who dared the open water. The Nile was their lifeline, a liquid highway where wooden boats, planks lashed with rope sealed with resin-hauled grain, and soldiers as early as 3000 BCE. But by the 15th century BCE under Pharaoh Hatshepsut, they pushed beyond the river's embrace, launching expeditions from Red Sea ports to the fabled land of Punt, maybe modern Somalia, or Eritrea. Picture her fleet, sturdy ships with curved hulls and square sails, loaded with incense gold and exotic animals, all detailed in vibrant reliefs at Deir el-Bahri. These weren't joyrides, sailors hugged coastlines, tracked stars and timed monsoons with a precision that'd make a modern captain nod. They likely borrowed know-how from local Red Sea mariners, blending it with their own star lore to navigate treacherous swells. Some whisper of trade reaching the Indus Valley, hinted by ivory and lapis lazuli in Egyptian markets. Imagine a captain, sweat-soaked, squinting at the horizon, his crew hauling oars under a sky heavy with promise and peril. If you've ever tackled a challenge bigger than yourself, picture these Egyptians, their ships not just vessels, but extensions of Pharaoh's will, carrying divine ambition across waves that could have swallowed empires whole. Now you're standing on the dusty shores of Lothal, a Harappan port city in ancient Gujarat, where the Indus Valley civilization turned the Arabian Sea into a trade lifeline. Flourishing from 2600 to 1900 BCE, the Harappans built cities with uncanny precision, standardised brick sanitation that'd shame a modern suburb, but their maritime game was just as sharp. At Lothal, they carved out a massive dockyard, 218 metres long, with floodgates channeling river to sea, a marvel that screams we meant business. Their flat-bottomed boats, likely rigged with sails, rode monsoon winds to Mesopotamia, carrying beads, ivory and ceramics. Sumerian texts nod to Meluha, a distant land sending ships stuffed with exotics swapped for silver and tin. No grand naval epics survive, no statues of Harappan admirals, just quiet clues, seals in Mesopotamian digs, terracotta boat models, a trade network stretching to the Persian Gulf. They navigated by stars and currents hugging coasts, stopping at harbours that buzzed with barter. Picture a Harappan sailor, his hands calloused from ropes scanning the night sky for cues, his cargo, a bridge between worlds. Their cities weren't fortified, they traded, not fought, connecting cultures with peace. If you've ever built something that outlasted you, imagine the Harappans, their ships gone, but their legacy etched in silent docks and scattered seals, whispering of a sea-bound empire that time almost forgot. You're riding the waves of the Aegean now, the salt wind sharp and the horizon alive with possibility. The ancient Greeks didn't just sail the sea, they made it their destiny. From the 8th century BCE, their city-states, Athens, Corinth, Rhodes, wove their identity into the ocean's pulse, their gods ruling waves, their heroes chasing myths like Odysseus or Jason. These weren't mere stories. They were the heartbeat of a people born to sail. Picture their ships, sleek merchant vessels at first, then triremes, three-tiered war machines, rowed by 170 men, bronze rams slicing through enemy hulls like knives through cloth. By the 5th century BC, Athens' navy ruled the Mediterranean, the Delian League, a maritime empire fueled by sea lanes and tribute. They colonised far beyond Greece-Sicily, the Black Sea spreading olive oil, wine and ideas, each port a spark in a vast economic web. Navigation. No compasses, just coastal landmarks, star constellations and oral lore passed down like sacred hymns. Imagine a Greek captain, sun-baked and squinting, steering by the Pleiades' rise, his crew's oars drumming a rhythm against the swell. The Peloponnesian War showed their limits. Naval defeats and blockades cracked Athens' pride, but their legacy sailed on shaping Roman fleets and Western thought. If you've ever felt the thrill of forging your own path, picture these Greeks, their sails taut, turning the sea into a stage for glory, knowledge and tragedy that still echoes today. Now you're cruising the Mediterranean, the sun glinting off waves that the Romans called Mare Nostrum, our sea. Early Rome was no naval power. Greeks and Carthaginians owned the coasts. But during the Punic Wars, Rome got scrappy. Picture this, they snagged a wrecked Carthaginian warship, reverse-engineered it, and churned out a fleet in months like some ancient industrial flex. Their secret weapon, the Corvus, a boarding bridge that turned sea fights into land battles, letting legionaries storm enemy decks like they were storming forts. By crushing Carthage, Rome claimed Sicily, Spain, and eventually the whole Mediterranean, their galleys, merchant and military hauling grain troops and silk from Egypt to Gaul. Ports like Ostia and Alexandria buzzed the sea, a Roman highway under the Pax Romana's calm. No compasses here, just dead reckoning coastal sailing and wind charts called periploi, with sailors timing voyages to the Etesian wind's rhythm. Imagine a Roman captain, his cloak snapping in the breeze, eyeing the horizon. For pirate sails his ship a lifeline for an empire stretching to the horizon. Rome didn't just conquer by land. Their navy stitched a patchwork sea into a unified realm, feeding cities and enforcing imperial will. If you've ever turned a weakness into a win, picture Rome late to the sea, but claiming it as their own, their legacy in every modern port and lighthouse still standing. You're standing at the edge of the sea now, its waves whispering tales of ancient mariners who turned oceans into pathways. The Minoans, Phoenicians, Austronesians, Egyptians, Harappans, Greeks and Romans didn't just sail, they wove the world together, their ships carrying more than cargo. They hauled ideas, faiths and technologies, stitching civilizations with threads of trade and curiosity. Picture the Phoenician alphabet born on a trader's scroll sparking Greek and Latin scripts that still shape our words, or Austronesian wayfinders chanting star maps to cross the Pacific, their lore inspiring modern navigators to sail without GPS. Greek stargazing laid roots for geography. Roman ports and lighthouses echo in today's harbours. These mariners read skies like books, felt currents like heartbeats, built ships that laughed at storms, all without steel or screens. Their roots let Buddhism drift from India, grain-feed Rome, and spices scent distant markets. No grand chronicles name these sailors, but their marks linger. A sunken amphora, a dock's weathered stone, a star path etched in oral verse. Every container ship humming through the Suez, every yacht skimming the Pacific owes a nod to those first brave souls who chased horizons. Imagine them, salt-crusted sails, frayed, landing on shores they couldn't name, yet connecting worlds they'd never see. If you've ever bridged a gap between strangers, picture these mariners, their legacy a tie that still carries humanity forward, linking us to the sea's eternal song. Picture yourself in the marble halls of an ancient palace, where every whisper carries the weight of empires. In the ancient world, royal children weren't just born, they were forged, shaped from the cradle, to carry crowns that could crush lesser souls. From Egypt's sun-scorched temples to China's silk-draped courts, these kids weren't raised for playdates, but for power, their lives a high-stakes game of legacy and survival. The moment they drew breath, they became symbols, pawns, and future rulers watched by courtiers sharper than daggers. Their education wasn't about curiosity, it was about control, crafting minds to command armies, charm envoys, and outwit rivals. Picture a young prince barely taller than his tutor's knee reciting treaties by candlelight, or a princess learning to read omens in stars, knowing one wrong step could topple a dynasty. They didn't learn for fun, they learned to wield words like swords, numbers like shields, and etiquette like armour. From Babylon to Rome, the goal was the same: mould a child into a ruler who could hold an empire together or burn it down. Settle in, maybe dim the lights for that cosy vibe, and let's dive into a world where every lesson was a battlefield. Drop a comment, where are you tuning in from and what's the vibe tonight? We're about to unravel the making of ancient royalty, one gruelling lesson at a time. You're still in that ancient palace, the air thick with incense and ambition, where tutors weren't just teachers, they were architects of empires. Royal children didn't get babysitters, they got philosophers, generals and priests tasked with sculpting raw potential into divine rulers. These tutors lived on a knife's edge, their success or failure tied to a child's fate. Take Aristotle, handpicked by Philip of Macedon to tame young Alexander. Picture him drilling the headstrong prince in ethics zoology, and Homer's epics planting seeds of conquest that'd bloom across half the world. Alexander didn't just learn facts, he absorbed a hunger for glory, carrying scrolls into battle like sacred relics. Or consider Seneca the Stoic shaping Rome's Nero, trying to instill virtue in a boy who'd later torch his own legacy. Seneca's failure wasn't all his fault palace intrigues, and Nero's whims outran even the best lessons. In Persia, military men taught princes to ride and shoot their loyalty to the crown, as vital as their skill. In China, Confucian scholars moulded heirs with piety and protocol, one misstep risking exile or worse. Imagine a tutor sweat beading under a silk robe, knowing a prince's blunder could cost their head. They were ghosts behind thrones, shaping history through whispered lessons, their names fading unless their pupils shone. If you've ever guided someone through a crucible, picture these tutors balancing wisdom and fear, crafting rulers whose steps echoed across centuries. You're slipping through the shadowed corridors of an ancient temple, where knowledge is guarded like gold, and only the chosen few royal heirs dare to learn. In the ancient world, education for princes and princesses wasn't tossed around in public squares. It was locked away in secret schools, hidden behind palace walls or sacred stones. In Egypt, picture young pharaohs to be in Karnak's temple, schools their sandal-clad feet echoing on stone, as priests drill them in hieroglyphs, star charts and rituals that bind life to the gods. Literacy was a rare jewel shared only with those destined to rule or speak for the divine, each lesson a step toward wielding cosmic power. In Persia, Herodotus whispers of the king's school, a veiled enclave where noble boys learned archery, truth-telling, and statecraft, their Zoroastrian ethics shaping satraps, who'd govern vast provinces. India's gurukuls tucked in forest clearings saw princes kneel before Brahmins, mastering Vedic hymns and swordplay under a guru's stern gaze, their education a blend of spirit and steel. Even in Greece, where knowledge spread wider, Spartan royal sons endured the Agoj, a brutal academy, forging warriors through pain and loyalty. These weren't classrooms, they were crucibles where every lesson was a test of destiny. Imagine a young prince, his hands stained with ink or blood, knowing his mind must be as sharp as his blade. If you've ever learned a skill in secret picture, these royal heirs, their hidden schools crafting rulers who'd hold empires in their grasp. Now you're in the women's quarters of a royal palace where silk rustles and power hums beneath polite smiles. Royal daughters in the ancient world weren't just groomed to marry, they were trained to wield influence, sometimes even empires. In Egypt, princesses like Hatshepsut learned in temple schools decoding hieroglyphs and mastering sacred rites, their knowledge rivaling any pharaoh's. Some destined as gods' wives of Amun held sway over wealth and worship, their education a key to divine authority. In Persia, Achaemenid queens managed vast estates, their lessons in bookkeeping and diplomacy, whispered behind palace curtains, readying them to pull strings in a man's court. Greek women's paths split. Athenian elites learned music and weaving, but Spartan princesses trained in rhetoric and athletics, their strength a shield for a warrior state. In India's Gupta courts, royal daughters studied Sanskrit poetry and philosophy, their charm a diplomatic weapon. China's consorts, like Wu Zetian, absorbed Confucian ethics and statecraft, turning etiquette into empire-building tools. Picture a young princess, her brush dancing across parchment, knowing a misstep could doom her, or a sharp word could save a dynasty. Their education wasn't a luxury, it was a survival kit, preparing them to charm rule or step into power when fate called. If you've ever balanced grace with grit, imagine these women, their lessons a quiet arsenal, ready to reshape history when the world least expected it. You're in a sunlit Greek agora now, the air buzzing with voices where words aren't just sounds, they're weapons sharper than any blade. In the ancient world, royal children didn't just learn to speak, they were trained to command, to sway crowds, to bend wills with a single phrase. In Athens, picture young aristocrats under masters like Isocrates practicing speeches that dance between logic, emotion and charm, logos, pathos, ethos, until their voices could silence a mob or spark a rebellion. A sharp tongue wasn't a luxury, it was a throne's foundation. In Rome, boys memorized Cicero's orations, their words polished to cut through Senate debates, or rally legions, every gesture calculated to hide nerves. Egypt's pharaohs-to-be learned divine proclamations, their voices carrying the weight of gods recited during rituals to bind heaven to earth. In Persia, princes mastered Old Persian and Aramaic, their tones honed to flatter envoys or intimidate rivals, each syllable a diplomatic chess move. India's royal heirs studied the Arthashastra, learning to weave espionage and flattery into every speech, knowing a misplaced word could lose a kingdom. Imagine a young prince sweat-beading, reciting under a tutor's glare, aware that one weak phrase could invite treason. Even in oral cultures like the Celts, storytelling was power. A chief's son had to spin tales that held tribes together. If you've ever won an argument with a well-timed word picture, these royals, their rhetoric a fire that lit empires or burned them down. Now you're gazing at a star-strewn sky, the same one ancient royals studied, where numbers and constellations weren't just beauty, they were power. For royal heirs, mathematics and astronomy were no abstract hobbies. They were keys to ruling timeland and fate. In Mesopotamia, Babylonian princes pored over clay tablets, mastering base 60 math to predict eclipses and plan wars, their calculations as vital as swords. Egypt's future pharaohs tracked Sirius's rise to time Nile floods, their geometry shaping pyramids and tax rolls, each angle a testament to divine order. In India, Gupta princes studied Aryabhata's algebra and planetary motion, aligning rituals with cosmic rhythms to prove their mandate. Greece's Macedonian heirs, like Alexander, saw math as a window to the cosmos logic, their lessons with Plato blending numbers with philosophy to map their place as rulers. In China, emperors' sons learned lunar cycles and calendar reforms, their mastery of the heavens proof of their divine right. Picture a young princess, her fingers tracing star charts by lamplight, knowing a misread omen could sway a kingdom's faith. These weren't just lessons, they were tools to govern harvests, build temples and claim destiny. If you've ever solved a problem with cold hard logic, Imagine these royals, their eyes on the stars, wielding math to hold empires together, their calculations whispering of a universe they were born to command. You're standing in the dust of an ancient training ground, the clash of swords ringing like a war hymn, where royal children learned that ruling meant mastering both blade and bow. In the ancient world, a prince or princess wasn't just taught to govern, they were forged to fight their education a brutal dance of warfare and etiquette. In Sparta, royal sons entered the agoge, at 7 stripped of comfort, trained to endure pain wrestle, and wield spears, their bodies as disciplined as their loyalty. Persian princes learned the noble arts of riding, archery and truth-telling, their bows drawn tight during hunts that doubled as war games, proving they could lead or die. India's Kshatriya heirs studied Dhanurveda, mastering swords, maces and the Mahabharata's lessons on honour in battle, each strike a test of destiny. Egyptian and Mesopotamian princes drove chariots and threw spears under generals' watchful eyes, their warlike posturing etched in stone reliefs. Rome's patrician sons sparred with wooden swords, studied Caesar's campaigns, and learned to balance courage with discipline. But warfare was only half the game, etiquette was a battlefield of its own. In Han China, princes memorized ritual codes, every bow and phrase a shield against rebellion. Persian courts taught heirs to charm envoys with veiled threats, while India's Arthashastra drilled them in diplomatic deceit. Picture a young heir, sweat-soaked from sparring, then bowing with precise grace, knowing a wrong move could spark war. If you've ever balanced strength with strategy, imagine these royals, their lessons in steel and manners, forging rulers who could conquer or captivate. Picture this. It's 1325, and you're jolted awake in a medieval village that makes your worst camping trip look like a luxury spa. Forget Hollywood's shining knights and fairy tale castles. The Middle Ages are a gritty, grimy fight for survival, where you're more likely to wrestle fleas than dragons. If you're cozy in bed right now, hit that like button and subscribe. Only if you're vibing with this journey, and drop a comment with where you're tuning in from and what time it is. It's wild to see who's joining us from across the globe. Now dim the lights, maybe flip on a fan for that soft hum, and let's dive into a world that'll make you kiss your Wi-Fi router in gratitude. You blink awake, sprawled on a straw mattress that's more bug than bed, the air thick with the stench of damp hay and last week's goat. It's not a bedroom, it's a wooden hut, one room for you, your family, a couple of chickens and an army of insects throwing a rave. The church bell clangs outside a relentless medieval alarm clock that doesn't care if you got 3 hours of sleep. Your blanket, a wool slab unswashed since the last king's coronation, weighs as much as a small pony caked with grime and regret. No memory foam, no fluffy pillows, just a scratchy pile of misery that smells like it was dragged through a barn because it was. You're 22, which is basically senior citizen status here, and your body's already filing complaints. Your spine creaks like a haunted gate, your knees crunch like a sack of gravel, and stretching feels like a personal attack. The air's so cold it bites, and your bare feet hit a floor that's either slick with last night's rain thanks to the leaky thatched roof, or crusty with mystery substances you don't want to identify. Privacy, a myth. Your family's snoring beside you, maybe a random cousin who's been crashing since the harvest, all sharing this open concept nightmare. The smell's a brutal mix of stale ale, human sweat, and something you hope isn't mould, but deep down know it is. This is your morning in medieval Europe, and it's not even 6 a.m. yet. You're never alone, fleas, rodents, and the weight of survival are your constant crew. Congrats, you're alive. The bad news. That's the highlight of your day. So pull yourself from this haystack of horrors, because nature's calling, and it's about to get a whole lot worse. You've clawed your way out of bed, but now nature's screaming, and it's not asking politely. If you're picturing a sparkling bathroom with fluffy towels snap out of it, this is 1325, and hygiene is a word nobody's invented yet. Your toilet's a wooden bucket tucked behind the hut, already brimming, because Uncle Wolfstan had a wild night with some dodgy turnips. The smell could knock a vulture off a corpse. You hold your breath, do what you gotta do, then brace yourself, toss it into the street. Yup, the street. You're supposed to yell Gardez-vous old French for watch out below, but nobody dodges fast enough. Medieval towns or open sewers, a charming stew of human waste animal droppings and liquids you'd rather not name. If you're in a fancy town with public latrines, don't get excited. You're shoulder to shoulder with strangers in a reeking outhouse, making awkward small talk while praying the wooden bench doesn't collapse. Ventilation's a cruel joke and toilet paper never